I use my tablet to look at my notes. So I don't know if I've said this before, but when we have these talks, what I do is I'll basically, a week or two before, and this time I was a little derelict in my duties with Tarique, so I didn't give him, but I write a bunch of questions. Honestly, I go off book most of the time, but I'll send them over and we'll say, hey, what do we think would be interesting topics? So I do have my tablet, my cheat sheet. So as I'm looking down, please don't think I'm rude.
Last time you had to switch to your mobile phone, I remember.
Last time I tried to switch to mobile, and that didn't work either, and I just went off the cuff, which was
pretty good. It sounded like you were totally prepared.
We'll probably go mostly off the cuff anyway, but anyway, so now I'm gonna actually start where I can edit the video in. So say thanks, Tarique, for coming down.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks. For all of you here who don't know Tarique, and I know some of you do, just wanted to let you know a little bit about what Tarique does, right? So Tarique works at the nexus of customer and market and product. He works for AT&T. He does mostly business development, but business development for Tarique borders on marketing and pricing, strategy and
Correct.
Sales, and there's this little bit in the middle that's where you own this. Why don't you just tell a little bit more about it?
Let me give it a shot, right. So large enterprises like AT&T tend to have large sales organizations, large marketing organizations, large product organizations that barely talk to each other. They have their own plans, they do their own things. So, a typical marketing organization will have a go-to strategy that they'll execute on for the general market. But the salespeople generally, what they do is they go after opportunities, specific opportunities and customers. So general marketing with specific customer targets don't usually work most of the times, basically. So in enterprise sales, they create these functions called sales enablement. And sales enablement function usually resides in a large sales organization, and their job is to be an executive sales or business development advisor to the executives and to the overall sales team, and to also bring in resources from across the company that's required to make, they're required to support actually strategic or tactical deals that you're going after. Because you want to synergize sales objectives with the rest of the organization supporting them. So sales enable functions sort of is an overlay function that sort of brings all that together. And that's what I do, basically.
You're in that sales
I'm
enablement.
in that sales enablement function.
And so Tarique and I, we've known each other close to a year, I guess.
I think so, yeah, maybe more than a year, actually, yeah.
And we were actually chatting recently, and I didn't actually know exactly like what he just said, what Tarique does. And when he said it, I thought, man, this is actually perfect for our group, because your job is to almost sounds like herding cats.
It is.
Your job is
part of it is absolutely.
Your job is getting everyone in the organization to work together, get on the same page, and move the organization forward from a revenue perspective. But that means you have to coordinate with.
That's correct. You do have to coordinate a lot, and you have to drive people to deliver on objectives to close deals. And it requires executive support. You can't do this if there's no buy-in between the various verticals that are supporting you. So if the VP plus in products, marketing, and sales don't agree on this, you can't get them to be a stakeholder in this process. So selling that takes a lot of time too. But the flip side of selling it is that you're also required to go back and report to them in terms of progress. And sometimes it's good, sometimes you get waterboarded, basically, in terms of why didn't you win this deal, right? Because they gave you all the resources that they wanted to give you, basically.
Is it fair to say that you do as much selling internally to your organization as you do externally?
Absolutely. So I spend a lot of time externally with business development and salespeople, providing them with product marketing expertise in terms of how to position. And mind you, in enterprise sales, it's not like you're going on Amazon.com and buying a book. That's not what it's about. Enterprise sales is about consultative selling. So you're selling complex products, basically. Software products where the buyers that you usually sell to are very knowledgeable about what they're buying. So you're going into an environment where you're trying to create a need, And typical cycle times in enterprise sales ranges anywhere from 6 to 18 months. So you've got to be willing as an organization to invest that capital to support your sales cycles. So
What kind of capital do you mean? Do you mean like, it's not only financial capital, I guess, it was probably also...
human capital, financial capital, resources across the board. So you're taking the risk in terms of spending 6 to 18 months worth of expenses to actually acquire a deal. And that can be a lot. It can go as high as $5 million, basically, because you're going after multi-billion-dollar deals. So typical ranges anywhere from $500,000 on the shortest side to over $1 billion over multiple years. So to go after it, the scale at which you operate to acquire that deal sort of goes on for 18 months. And it's almost like a small company that goes after an opportunity. That's what you're trying to do. It's an integration of small company. You build a small company with multiple resources coming in to go after this opportunity.
Yeah.
And you're marketing, you're doing business development, you're providing technical innovations, you're doing proof of concepts, you're spending money on that. Bottom line is you're trying to manage the customer experience so they buy from you, basically.
Yeah, I manage that is very much a relationship sale as well.
Completely. It's 95% personal relationship, 5% can be transactional, which is rare. It happens in instances where a company wants to use up its budget by the end of the year, and you show up at the right time and they want that thing, you'll close that deal in a week. But other than that, 95% of it is totally consultative, to the point where you have to know the customer's business in terms of how they operate, what their challenges are. So you've got to do a lot of homework so the customer knows that you know their business. In enterprise selling, that's very significant, because if they sort of get the indication that you don't know their business and you're trying to sell them something, it's a total mismatch. That's a negative customer experience for them.
And do you then probably also not only have to know their business, but know the political system within their business?
Totally.
Right, I'm selling to this person, who do they need to convince on their end? What is the outcome that they're looking for, not just the business, but the person? Are they looking for a promotion? Can you talk about, do you have a frame that you use to...
Yeah, we have a certain approach to it, actually. We call it relationship strategy, actually. That's what it's called. And the whole relationship strategy is about, if you're selling to a large enterprise like AT&T, or like we do to large financial institutions, or we sell to the Department of Defense, you really have to go top to bottom and horizontally across the verticals. And you have to figure out who the stakeholders are, top to bottom, horizontally. You've got to most importantly figure out, if there is a budget, who owns that budget? And if there isn't a budget, who do you have to convince to create that budget? And you've got to figure out who the influencers are, basically. There are a lot of influencers across the organization that they are not decision makers, but they have a significant amount of influence on the buying process and the products. And they include people like enterprise architects, procurement people, IT folks, that the kind of guys who fix your laptops, that say, I don't care how much that's costing. If it doesn't fit into my environment, I'm not buying it. You've got to go across all these segments and talk to these guys and get their buy-in. And that can take some time.
So it's both influence and authority.
Totally. Influence, authority. You've got to go to the C-suite, C-level suite. You've got to interact with them. And that is a very important thing. One of the lessons we have learned in our enterprise selling is that you have to engage C-level suite folks early on. We normally do it when we think a deal is at risk. So we bring them in and we sort of connect them and we try to turn it around. But early engagement is huge, actually, because when you do the C-level connections, all of a sudden resources become available that weren't available. People that didn't have time to talk to you become available and they talk to you. So
yeah.
It's important, and I would recommend doing it in the early part of the cycle, in probably the first 3 months, so you can connect with these guys and talk to them and explain to them what you're trying to do.
So you have a big company behind you and a big name. AT&T,
Yes.
It doesn't get much bigger than AT&T.
Correct. They are big.
If if a startup, if an early stage startup that's resource constrained, they don't have that $500,000 to spend on the sales cycle.
They don't.
If they want to go into AT&T and they're looking to sell to AT&T, what would be your best advice? How do they manage that sales cycle? How do they leverage relationships?
It's a very good question. Yeah, it's a very good question. It's, first of all, you need to have a little bit of resiliency and perseverance here.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen instantly. So, I mean, but if you do have those components, there are a few ways to go about it. One of them is to figure out if the company invites innovation. So in the current atmosphere, actually, a lot of large technology companies have developed outlets to invite innovation. We've done the same thing, actually. So in AT&T, there's an innovation organization called AT&T Foundry. So if you've got a technology or a product that aligns with what they're trying to do business-wise to grow their business. And if you're interested in selling to AT&T, I would recommend go and read their investor relations document. You'll know what the top 5 opportunities are right away. And if you have products that sort of target any of those specific 4 to 5 items that they're looking to do, go to the Foundry. There's a website, and this is very simple. You go to the website, you apply, and you tell them about your product and what you have. They look at every one of the opportunities that come in. No question about it. And they'll respond to you. They'll respond to you in a very short period of time and tell you if they're interested or not. And if they're interested, before I go further, it's a crowdsourcing platform, basically. It's what it is. Supply and demand. They're trying to crowdsource and bring in ideas. If they like your ideas, there are 3 to 4 innovation centers across the world. One of them is in Plano, Texas. No, actually in Dallas, Texas. One of them is Palo Alto, California. One of them is in Tel Aviv, Israel. There's one more we just opened. I can't remember where. It might be in Washington, D.C. They basically do whatever they can to make it easy on you to bring in your technology into those innovation centers and supply you with all the resources you need to demonstrate your product. So there's no capital expense to you except to get there on a plane and bring your software or whatever you have. And they provide you the full environment, you integrate in there. They have smart developers out there that will work with you to figure out if there's value in it. And a number of products have been rolled out from that innovation center that have cut down our product life cycle by about a third to 50%. And that's one of the biggest deals, trying to market. You want to bring in products as soon as possible, get beyond the usual product cycle, and try to deliver it in a short period of time. So we recently released one product. It's called AT&T Toggle. And for those of you who are in the telco world or in the communication space and use phones, you might have heard of the concept of BYOD, bring your own devices. And in the space of BYOD, a lot of enterprises are struggling with figuring out how to implement it. And the reason they even want to implement it is because a lot of their employees tend to have devices that are smartphones. And they want to save capital by not spending money on buying devices. And employees on the same hand also want to keep their cell phone and maintain their privacy. So the whole BYOD concept allows you to containerize 2 environments, which allows you to keep a personal profile and an enterprise profile that allows you to access certain kinds of data and productivity applications in your employer's enterprise environment. So that was one of the products that got rolled out in about a year with this company who came in, did a test, and within a year it was rolled out. And it's a very serious platform. If you're interested, it's a good way to go.
That was called Toggle?
Toggle, yeah. They actually just released it a few months ago.
There are a couple of competitors in New York, I think, that are actually working on similar things. It's an interesting...
It's a very interesting space.
Problem, yeah.
It's a very interesting space. And it's probably going to take off, although there are a lot of open issues around, if you have a phone, who pays for your data plan, your company or you? And there are questions around revenue, fees, billing. There are a lot of back-end billing issues you have to deal with in this kind of environment.
So if you were at a startup I imagine you wouldn't just leave the chance. It sounds like that would be a great place to go, is to put your idea into this
Oh,
system.
definitely.
But how would, I imagine if you were doing this, you'd also play the relationships as much as you could, so to reach out to a person.
Yeah, that is actually novelty. That never existed.
Yeah.
So that's a new thing everyone can take advantage of and we haven't done a good job of marketing it.
Mhm.
We should. But you're right, if you didn't have that, if you're in a startup environment, and I would say if you've got, I'm making this up, if you've got investors, venture capital investors that sit on your board, a lot of these guys didn't have relationships with companies like ours. They know people like ours, like us. As a matter of fact, we invest in startups as well. So that is an excellent way to reach out to executives in a large enterprise as a venture capital guy and say, look, I've got this product. Take a look at it. You might be interested in it. Tons of traction. Tons of traction. Between the venture capital people and the co-founders and founders, it lends a lot of legitimacy, and they are very open to listening to it. You will get traction. There's a company called Cividia out of Israel that is funded by a bunch of venture capitals that has some people that sit on the board that know our CTO, John Donovan, through relationships.
Yeah.
And he gave him 30 minutes, and they talked with him. And that's how it works. Those relationships matter. And also relationships, accessing people at the top level in companies is important because you can get lost in the morass in the middle. You know, in our company, there are about 300,000 employees. You can get lost easily. So you need to know where you are and who you're working with. Otherwise, you'll be lost. You can spin cycles, you know, in the wrong direction, spin, you know, tons of activity in an inefficient way and burn time and not get to the right place. The other thing I would say is there are people out there who do this for a living, who come out of companies like AT&T, who are executives that provide you with consulting services. And they specialize on startups to bring them access. They also have a lot of relationships in the investment community. So that would be one way to go.
So overall, it sounds like first step is to do your research. Understand the company, understand their needs, understand who it is in the company that you need to get in touch with.
You need to get to, yeah.
And the second step, build relationships, become valuable to them.
Become valuable to them. And I would say, if you're going to pitch these guys, more than likely, they've seen a product similar to what you're offering them. I would say that's probably 80% of the time. So it's that 20% that matters to them. And, you know, if you come across as a person who innovates, if your product is innovative, whatever that means, meaning you've got components to your product that others don't have, or you're easily integratable for a number of reasons. You know, they'll look at it and they'll say, okay, that might be interesting. I forgot my train of thought where I was going with that. But anyway, bottom line is they will listen to you if you have an interesting story. And they do not like to hear from sales or business development people. They like to hear from founders. So I would push the founders and get them involved in this process. And have them say, you want to talk about this, basically. And they're very good, actually. They will invest in your idea if they like it. They really do. Toggle was an investment on our part. We took it, we modified it, and we sell it with licensing arrangements with this company that we bought it from.
And was that an early stage investment? Most institutional investors, like the large companies who invest, usually come in a little later.
This was not early stage at all.
Okay.
This came in a little later, where I'm guessing it's probably Series B or Series C or something like that. You know, they're there and they're talking about it.
Strategic
and they have
investment.
something, yeah, it's a strategic investment. It is significant. It's significant in terms of if it allows you, and if your product allows you to generate revenue for them, it's even better. Because if you're in the efficiency space, you know, unless they have an objective that says we got to cut down expenses by X%, it's kind of a hard sell. It's very hard to sell. But revenue sell is a much easier target, actually. Or if you're reducing capital spend, actually, instead of operational expense, that goes a long way.
So reducing cost of servers?
Definitely, it would go a long way. If
Yeah.
you don't have to buy a lot of service, very good call.
Yeah.
You have something.
Interesting. So you were saying that it's, let me just stop here and say, like, I'm facilitating this and I've just got deep into the conversation. I have another question that I definitely want to ask, but I want this to be as open as possible. Like, you guys should feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, whatever you'd like. So I'm going to ask my one more question, then I hope that you guys will have some questions for Tarique as well.
Absolutely. It's a small forum. Go ahead.
Yeah. So you were saying that,
Feel free.
you were saying, again, they like to speak with founders. They don't like to speak with biz dev or salespeople.
Less
It sounds
so, yeah.
like it really is about creating that relationship. It's not the same thing with angel investors. I've heard is, you know, it is as much about that relationship that this person is going to have and what can I get out of the relationship as the deal.
Yeah. It is very much about authenticity and relationships. So if you're selling to a CTO organization as a biz dev guy, it's not that you don't have authenticity. You've got to understand the mindset, basically. CTOs tend to think technology, technical people. They're like, I want to spend my time talking to someone who knows about this technology. So it's kind of knowing your audience, kind of knowing who you're targeting. Not the case for salespeople or marketing. It's a little different. In my case, you know, it's very interesting. That's an interesting way to do it. But we also do partnerships with companies on a per deal basis, which means that if you're constructing a deal, you know, say you're selling some service to Goldman Sachs, and there's some component in that service you're selling to them that requires a very specific kind of monitoring for their network. I'm just making this up. And you don't have that product. You've got to go out there and find a third-party guy that has a very unique product to bring them into the table and integrate it in there. And so there are opportunities that happen on a deal-by-deal basis. So knowing business development people as well from these organizations may lead you somewhere, actually. So something to keep in mind.
So whether you're an enterprise or a startup, when you do relationship strategy, what are some techniques? Like, how do you find who owns the budget for a project? And
Oh, that's a very good question.
Like, can you give us some techniques that you use?
Yeah, most of it comes down to research. You can spend a few weeks actually doing this research. So in our company, there are tools. There's tons of tools you can use that have collective data on this company. They're obviously basic things like their, you know, income statements, balance sheet, what their executive suite looks like, but also very specific data in terms of what they're investing in, what kinds of areas they're investing in. They usually have a plan. If you really dig deep in their investor relations book or find some other documents, some presentation they did at, say, Morgan Stanley, you will usually find some level of research will tell you what they're investing in. And you can usually, I mean, I'm theoretically throwing this out there, but you can take a look at where they're investing. And sometimes it's very hard to map that investment and figure out who's actually managing the investment and who owns it in a larger organization. And that's tough to do sometimes, but you can make guesses. You can make guesses in terms of if it's investments in IT enhancements or improvement. That's usually in the CIO organization. You know, if it's investments in terms of emerging technologies we're about to deploy, like maybe a new kind of router or a new kind of optical system you're deploying out there, mostly under a CTO function. And if they start talking about branding and campaigning in terms of reaching out to X number of markets to launch their product, you're talking marketing basically. So you've got to have some level of intelligence in terms of kind of how to associate these things and look at what vertical they fit in. And most often you'll just know who the executives are. But I found LinkedIn to be very resourceful actually. You can use LinkedIn, you get on there, and in a company like AT&T, it's very hard to figure out who some of these players are, but if you punch in some of the keywords, you just might get lucky and find some of these contacts.
So it sounds like two of the big research tools for you then are, like you said, LinkedIn, actually just doing some
is,
searching
yeah,
online. But investor relations, any public company has
Tons of data.
investor documents that are out there.
There are, yeah. Tons of data out there, and they also present a lot of data in terms of, you know, we go to a lot of events out there, tons of events, which is our way to promote our products and solutions. And there are like 4 to 5 key events that all telcos go to. There's a light reading conference, there's the CTI Cellular Wireless Conference in Vegas, there is the TMW conference in Orlando that happens. There are 4 or 5 of them, and they're very industry specific, and they're extremely valuable in terms of relationships, extremely valuable. If you go to any of these industry events, you will walk away with a lot of connections. There's no question about it. And you'll get an idea in terms of who does what. A lot of people, by the way, in these big organizations are willing to help you. If you talk to them and you say, look, I'm looking to do this. Do you know someone who might know this and can help me with that? They'll help you, actually, most of the time. I mean, I do, others do. It's not, I totally understand it's very complicated. So you've got to find people, even in the mid-level, if you can, to see how things go up the chain and down the chain somehow.
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Lisa. I work in sales and marketing for a data center. And my question to you is, where did you get your start? You're in enterprise sale, business development now. Did you start off doing cold calls? Did you start off knocking on doors?
No, no.
Sales, or?
No, I never did that. I still don't do sales, actually.
Okay.
Sales enablement, but not sales.
Sales. I measured on 2 metrics, actually. It's a good question, and I'll come back and answer that question. I measured on how many deals I close, revenue-wise, but not as a direct salesperson. But I'm also measured on the number of deals we lose, particularly those deals that we lose because of us. In other words, these were factors that we could have controlled in terms of winning the deal. And they usually boil down to tons of communication issues, you know, lack of support. I mean, there are a plethora of issues there. And they measure me on that. So that number, percentage of that deal for us, where we lost deals because of us, was about 40% a couple of years ago. Very large number.
Yeah.
And we had to cut it down. We're down to about 20%. But any organization that focuses on losses, which most sales organizations don't, they don't even want to talk about it. If they're done, they're moving on, right? If you focus on losses, you really try to get to the root cause of what may have caused it. It could have been lack of marketing support, you know, poor product, pricing could have been bad. You really need to dig into it. And we actually interact with customers that we lost a deal to figure it out. Because the salespeople will tell you things you probably not right for the most part. But to answer your question, I never was part of business development or sales. I started off as a junior analyst in telecommunications, looking at a global network, basically, where we're trying to go from an analog environment to a digital environment. So I started off as an analyst trying to make that transition. And I went up a little bit through the ranks to do some process stuff, some business analysis stuff. Had a good mind for marketing and products. Eventually, I left AT&T and went and ran a marketing business development organization for a software company selling to telcos, actually. I did that for about 3+ years, and then, you know, I got a call back from AT&T. They were like, you know, we're starting something new. Would you be interested in doing this? And they were starting to build a defense consulting practice. So they wanted to win defense contracts from the Department of Defense. And they knew I had the background to do it. So I came in and I took that role. It was a specific sales enablement role where they actually knew up front that they needed someone who understood technology, markets, customers, and who could pull it all together to support the sales organization. So that's how I ended up there. It's more a journey more than anything specific you look for. Those roles are not advertised, actually. I've never seen a job description for sales enablement anywhere.
Yeah.
So,
You mentioned twice now something that I think is really important that I've had to learn through my career. You said you just reach out and ask, right? So
Yeah.
there were two places where you said that. One, if you don't know who in the system that you need to reach out to someone in the system and ask.
Absolutely.
And they'll usually help. And then two, you said, even when we lose deals, we'll reach back out to the person that we were selling to and we'll ask.
we will,
And those are
absolutely.
really hard things, I think, for entrepreneurs to do. And it's hard
Yeah.
things for people younger in their career to know it's okay to reach out and ask.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you'll have, it's a little bit of an interesting, emotionally speaking, going back to a customer that you lost to.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of uncomfortable to go back to them and say, can you tell us why we lost? And they themselves are uncomfortable about it. But if you're really upfront about it, say, look, just trying to figure out what we did wrong. They'll tell you. They will tell you. They'll tell you if the price wasn't right. They'll tell you if they didn't like their business development person. Oftentimes you'll talk to them and you'll see your perception internally from where the BD guy was leading it versus what the customer perception was were two different things. And so there never was a chance from the beginning, ever. You'll run into pricing issues, but in enterprise sales, pricing is important, but we have lost tons of deals where we're cheap, significantly cheaper. And so it's important, but it's not the most important thing. It's the customer experience that matters, so long as your price is competitive out there. Cheap only matters if they're looking to buy a lowest price, technically acceptable solution, meaning barely passes your technical requirements and it's low price, and they're willing to live with it. But if they want things like innovation and thought leadership, which goes beyond a certain product, they're going to pay for it. If you provide them that value, they will pay for it, and they appreciate it.
Anyone else? So,
Yeah, just one question. For a startup company, making or reaching some agreements, partnership agreements with a large company can obviously benefit from the scale and growth. One thing I've experienced going into meetings, with large companies is, they tend to feel that the leverage or balance of power is on their end, and clearly as a small startup.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Right, more than half the time. If I promise you that it's not AT&T that we'll be meeting with, do you have any tips or things that
Yeah.
impress you in previous
That's a very good
meetings
question. I've been on that side where I've sold to large enterprises. It's very interesting in terms of how you have to sell it. The first thing I would do is you've got to think through all the objections they'll throw at you. Think about all the objections. So if you're a startup company, one of the most basic objections that's going to come to you is, if we're your only customer or one of two big customers, we don't want to do that. It's too high of a risk. You've got to answer that somehow, because they can see the risk, a financial risk, but they may not see the value in your product. Maybe it's customer service. Maybe you're going to provide a level of customer service that the other competitors can't. So you've got to come up with a list of objections, know how to answer them. The other one is financial statements. They will want to know how stable you are. Are you in debt? How much debt are you in? You'll have to answer that somehow. One way to answer that is, whatever you sell them, the rights to the code, put them in an escrow account. And this way they feel safe. So if you lose the company, they can still have access to your code. That's one way to do it. Pricing can be an issue. If your pricing is really low, they kind of know what they're looking for. They'll tell you that. They're like, you're way off. And they'll question you in terms of, how did you come up with your pricing? They'll want to know what it is. And it's important for enterprises like that to know that they understand your pricing. It should be very simple to them to understand it. One thing about pricing, by the way, if you have a product that you're pricing, one thing about pricing I'd say is, make sure you have a simple model that scales. So, if you have a simple model that scales, to me that means that there are relatively standard processes along the way. You have standard pricing, whether it's hardware, software, whatever. and you can quickly spin it out. I used to work for an organization where we took guesses, and we sort of put prices out there, and all of us executives would get involved, and they would say, this is the price, we're going after it. And we started winning deals, and as the volume went up, their time became less and less available to make those pricing decisions. So make sure you have a simple pricing structure, relatively simple pricing structure, because they will ask to dwell into it, basically. The other thing I'd say, if you're selling them something, bundling is one way to go. So you've got components, and you can bundle them and give it to them. But make sure if you're bundling and selling stuff to them, they're aware of it. Because you could run into an issue where if they just know you sold them this one capability, but you bundled in the second capability, sooner or later they're going to find out that they have this capability that they never thought they did. And they'll be really annoyed because the general perception will be, why am I spending something on a product I don't even use? That's a negative perspective. It's going to help you, it's going to stop you from going and upselling to them again.
So transparency.
So transparency is very key here. But list all the objections down. They'll have all kinds of objections relative to risks associated with your longevity, your ability to survive, your financial status, and the viability of your product. So I hope that helped.
Yeah.
In terms of objection management, objection handling,
Yeah.
how did you practice and get better at that? What are the ways that you've
That's a good
developed
question.
yourself there?
It's been experience, actually. It's been getting into meetings and getting your ass kicked and coming out of it, right? And you're like, shit, I never thought about that. So,
Yeah, objection handling in any BD or sales
it's a big
environment.
big thing.
Huge.
And by the way, there will be that technical person in that room. You talk to this one person that is Mr. Objection. There'll be all kinds of objections. And you've got to find a way to handle that, because it can take you off track in terms of your message when you're in a meeting. So one recommendation I have is, when you have meetings, make sure it's peer-to-peer. So if you have VPs coming to this meeting, have just VPs coming to this meeting. If you have technical managers coming to this meeting, just have technical managers coming to this meeting. Don't invite VPs and technical people together, because it's just,
Yeah.
it's a zoo.
They have different interests.
Yeah, different perspectives.
Have there been examples where you lost an opportunity and then went back to them and said, I'd like to know why we lost this, and that actually resulted in you winning that business later on?
Not me personally, no. We have won it on recompetes. So what that means is, if a company wins, if you compete with a competitor and you lose, a typical contract size can go anywhere from a year to a couple of years, because tons of professional services is involved and all that kind of stuff. And if that contract comes up for renewal and that contractor hasn't performed well, then they're looking. So you've got to keep an eye on why they might be looking. And it's a very emotional state, because they're looking, but they can't quite go over the hump to make a decision to acquire another product, because they don't want to switch, because the cost to switch is huge. And in their minds, they're thinking it's sunk cost. So why should I invest more money to go buy another product? So it's kind of, unless the experience has been totally horrible, which they're like, get out of here, I'm bringing these people in, that's a different story. But most of the time it's in the middle. So you've got to answer the objection to switching costs, transition costs. And there has been one instance where a couple of years later we went back and they bought our product and replaced our competitors for two specific reasons. One of them was we provided them with innovation. So those innovations were targeted to their business needs. So they wanted to cut expenses, operational expenses. So we provided a bunch of innovations that targeted automation, and the previous company had. So that gives you an edge. So even if your product doesn't have, even if your product is the same as your competitor's product, it's sort of presenting the features and providing innovation relative to their objectives. And if you can understand that, you demonstrate you know their business. And the second thing was a little bit on pricing. We were pretty competitive, maybe slightly lower, but that's them taking advantage of us because they already have someone. And they're like, why should I pay more than that? One instance for me, but I've heard of other instances as well. Does that answer your question?
So enterprise is like the hottest thing in startups now, like B2B startups get funded more, like are more likely to get funded than B2C startups.
Sure.
But like, what are some things that enterprise startups shouldn't try? Like we said, the efficiency sell is harder than the capital sell or revenue sell. What are some things which are hard or almost impossible?
That's a good question.
Like, is efficiency sell hard because companies are always think they're the best already? Like,
No, efficiency sells hard because it's considered incremental improvement. That's the major issue. You know, incremental improvement is not going to change their direction dramatically. I mean, that's the issue with efficiency. And efficiency is slow progress. So incremental over like 10 years gives you some value in terms of cutting headcount. Essentially, that's what it's about. That is the biggest issue with that. I mean, to me, that's a tough one. But there are certain instances in which efficiency can help. So if you take our industry, telecommunications industry, we manage a global network that carries about 30 petabytes of data traffic, which is a humongous amount of data traffic. And in 30 bytes of data traffic that goes through that network, you've got to provide a certain level of service level agreement and performance to your business customers because you're committed to that, and there are financial repercussions to that actually. So if you have a product in that kind of a space that says, I can make you more efficient in knowing where your network performance bottlenecks might be in a proactive way, even though it's in the efficiency space, that'll get traction. That'll get traction because it's eventually tied to revenue. Anything that's tied to SLA is tied to revenue for sure. So just efficiency tied to some level of revenue impacting customers will usually get you some traction. But in general, no. In general, no. Did that answer your question?
yeah.
You're welcome.
Can you talk about the political side of biz dev and sales, like understanding organizations from a political mindset? If you have any examples or any anecdotes, that would be great too.
I have several anecdotes, good and bad.
Yeah.
I spent probably 50% of my time talking to people, trying to tell people that they should do their jobs, trying to convince people to give me something that I need, persuading them. And people are people. You need to know them. You know what turns them on, doesn't turn them off, hot buttons, cold buttons, when to ask, when to not ask, when to go above them if they're not giving you something. And that is one of the most difficult parts of my job, I have to say. Really the most difficult part of my job. Tons of politics, particularly in the sales organization where salespeople are in it to make money. That's the bottom line. That's why they're in there, otherwise there's no other reason to be in there. And so if you take anything away from them that cuts into that compensation they might possibly get, a completely demotivated guy, you're getting that guy. And the politics of that is poor performance, not responding to emails, throwing a fit in meetings, complaining. Salespeople tend to be very loud in terms of what they want. So you sort of have to put it in perspective, The reaction has to be proportional to the issue at hand. They can overreact most of the times. But most of the time what works is facts. So what I mean by that is, we're constructing a deal once. Salesperson, very complex deal. Salesperson came up to us, and I'm working with this guy, but it's a supremely aggressive guy. And I've handled a lot of aggressive people in the past. It's a different way to do it. But his aggressiveness was off the cycle, was not connected to the customer's buying cycle. So what he wanted and when he wanted it did not correlate to the customer's buying cycle. So, if you want somebody to deliver something to you when the customer is probably about a month away, it's not going to happen. So it depends on what you're asking. So if you ask the person to, in this case, we're bringing in some products, and we were totally replacing all their high-end architects, engineers, and technologists. And so what that meant is you had to organize this in a certain way and make it an optimal organization, which is a complicated thing to do on the scale on which this was being done. You can't do this in 2 days. And let alone the fact that customers probably not going to want this until 2 months down the road. And the third factor is you get to that point only if you've had some level of qualification that says, okay, this may be real. Let's go forward with this. So you run into those issues where he's aggressively trying to sell it, and I understand where he's coming from, but it's not a priority for me. And it's not a priority for a lot of other organizations that support it. And, I'm the voice of the customer, I'm the voice of the salespeople, but there are instances where you have to push back and just say it doesn't make any sense. And it's going to get escalated to your VP. He's going to ask you, why didn't you support this guy? And as long as you have your facts, it's okay most of the time. Marketing challenge is the same thing. One of the biggest problems I have with marketing and sales not connecting and aligning is marketing, they come up with these products and features, and they do a pretty good job at it. But it's based on a market segmentation and a generic understanding of what the requirements are. And in some instances, they're talking to some customers and doing some sensitivity testing or customer demand analysis. Like, does this make sense? But it's very sporadic. And so they come up with features, they have a roadmap, and some general communication materials. Those general communication materials tend to be very helpful only in the first month of your sales cycle because they're general. They give you an idea of what the customer might be interested in. After the first month, second month, it comes down to being very specific. So where exactly are you solving the problem? And that's where marketing is not connected. And so what I've started doing is I bring marketing into all our deals on strategic opportunities. And I have them focus on strategic customers, which is what they should do in my opinion, because if we really want to use marketing the right way, they have got to be customer centric. All touch points need to be very customer centric, so they've got to execute at the customer level. And they've got to find a way to market thought leadership around that deal we're trying to construct with our value proposition in all products and promote them, whether it's at events, whether it's publishing articles in magazines these guys read, or whatever channels they use to consume technology data and information.
I think we'll have time for one more question. Sure.
So if you're like in a company, you said 50% of your time is kind of selling internally, trying to get buy-in?
50% of my time is handling people issues. People issues, yes.
How much of that do you think you can change if you were restructuring your organization? Like how much of that time could you throw, you know what I mean?
You can change a little bit of it, for sure. There are certain things you can change, for sure. So I spend my time talking to these guys a lot because I have to go after product and marketing guys to figure out not just on a strategic or tactical opportunity basis, but also on a long-term basis. What are they investing in? Because I take them to my customer meeting and bring their roadmaps with me. And I have them show our customers what the roadmap is. And I have them hear it directly in terms of what they want. So they've got to come back and they've got to build a business case that says, I have enough demand out there to invest some capital in this. Now, that process, if it was done the right way, doesn't really need me. They should have a set of customers that they should go to and go and talk to. It should be a part of a plan. But that is grossly lacking in most marketing organizations that I talk with. So you can do that, but then executive buy-in is important. The fact that they even understand that marketing has to be tied not just to the general market, but to specific customers on large strategic deals is sometimes lost on them. So, you can make that efficient, but I wouldn't have a job then. They wouldn't be efficient.
Great.
So,
Well, thank you so much, Tarique, for coming down and talking with us. I really enjoyed it.
I did too. Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks.
I hope it helped you guys.
Well, we have the room for another half hour or so you guys can hang out, mill about, talk with each other, come up and speak with Tarique unless you need to go right away.
No, I have a few minutes. I'm good.
And hopefully I'll see you guys again next month.